Well, hey, everybody. Happy Thursday. Pre-Friday. Getting ready to record Mike in the Midwest for the week of November 5th, 2020. Episode 20 here in just a second. Excuse me. And we're going to have some fun talking Saturday morning memories with breakfast cereals from the 80s. All right. This is going to be a good one, I think. We will see. Levels look good. Hey, to whoever's watching there on YouTube as we record live. Happy Thursday. That's what you get when you subscribe. You find out anytime the channel goes live. All right, let's do this. Episode 20. I'll write that down. 20 sounds so small when you have almost 1,800 podcast episodes. Here we go. Now we got two people watching live. Hey. I try to sneak these in, but I like to, if you're watching, if you're subscribed, you can get in. All right. Let us do episode. Excuse me. I'm having a rough time this morning. All right, episode 20. Welcome to episode 20 of Mike in the Midwest, a mini podcast here for the loyal patrons of the Be Our Guest podcast. My name is Mike Rallman. Of course, I am the host of the Be Our Guest podcast, and you can find my website, of course, at beourguestpodcast.com. If you haven't dropped by there in ages, which I don't blame you. I mean, it's 2020. A lot of times we don't go to websites, but if you're on your mobile device and you just type in beourguestpodcast.com, it's basically a mobile app that is very responsive. And if you ever want to listen to the show right away, boom, it's right there. It's very clean, very simple. And you can even bookmark it, put on your homepage, make a widget out of it now with iOS 14. And it makes it an easy way to get the show. But if you don't mind, because you guys are the most dedicated of our listeners, do subscribe to the podcast on a favorite app, whether it's Pocket Casts or Overcast or whatever you listen to, Apple Podcasts. When you subscribe, you'll never miss a show, and it really does help our, keeps the downloads consistent. So we really appreciate that. So thanks to everybody who has subscribed. Thanks for being a patron of the show. You guys, literally, I say this every show, you are carrying the podcast right now. And we're going to get through this, and we're going to keep this show going. We've been doing this for 12 and a half years. You're going to help me bridge that gap until things hopefully get turned around in 2021. We'll just be back to normal, doing lots of shows, nothing extra, everything free as always. So thank you for being so very generous and kind in helping us keep the show moving through these times where we just need a little help. All right. So today, fun show topic. I'm excited about this one. Kind of came to me a few nights ago. But before we do that, last week we talked about all the cars I owned, right? Didn't get a lot of feedback on this one. I didn't think we would. It's not super exciting. But Heather Hayden, thank you for being a patron, left a message over on Patreon. She said, I took driver's ed on a 1988 Toyota Tercel. God, just that name reminds me. I love going back in time and thinking about stuff that's not with us anymore. My parents gave me an Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme Brougham. I don't even know what that is. I do know that I almost, when I talked about having the Buick Skyhawk, it was between a Buick Skyhawk and an Olds Cutlass that was at the old used car lot. And I picked out the Buick Skyhawk, but I almost had a Cutlass Oldsmobile too. That sounds so funny. The longest name for a gas guzzling rear. Oh, so the old Cutlass Supreme Brougham says the longest name for a gas guzzling rear wheel drive boat. It had the fanciest seats. It was like driving in a recliner. I had a boyfriend who had an ultra cool Fiero. Okay. I don't know. Like you guys know, I'm in my mid 40s. If you're in your mid 40s, I think at least every kind of guy my age, probably, and some of the ladies, I'm sure, didn't everybody want a Pontiac Fiero? They're just little sporty cars. A lot of times they give them out as prizes on the game shows in the 80s. I wanted one so bad, but my dad always said they catch on fire all the time, and they did. but he wouldn't let me get a Fiero, which I couldn't get anyway, but he also wouldn't let me get a Wrangler. And now what have I driven for the last 22 years? A Wrangler. That's just how I am. She says, thanks for the walk, or should I say drive down memory lane. Can't wait to see that restored MG. That's right. It's still down in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. My uncle has it. And when the time is right, I'm going to get it back from him and clean it all up and maybe get a, what are those, the bowler hat, not a bowler hat, but my father-in-law calls it a jelly roll. Get a jelly roll hat and cruise around like I'm some British spy, like some old guy in an MG, top down, looking like I'm Sean Connery or something. Shout out, rest in peace to Sean Connery. All right, so let us jump into today's topic. I'm excited for this one. Again, Mike in the Midwest. The focus of this show, the goal of the show is kind of a nostalgia type show to kind of talk about things I did growing up here in St. Louis, Missouri, and seeing how it is the same or different from wherever you grew up around the country or even around the world. And also, hopefully you can share the show maybe with your kids and talk about things that you had that were so very cool at the time that maybe they have no idea about right now, because things obviously have changed a lot. I mean, you got to think about, just something as simple as, if you have a smartphone in your hand, you're on the internet, you can talk to anybody anywhere on our planet with a couple of taps on the screen. That is just remarkable, because I'm going to talk about, not on today's show, but about BBSing back in the day and running a Commodore 64 bulletin board system, which was well before the internet. But just to get an email from somebody outside my area code back in the day was like mind blown. And now it's so easy to talk to anybody around the world. But today we're going to talk about a couple of topics that go together, and it's going to bridge into a show for next Thursday as we move towards the Thanksgiving holiday. And if in 3 weeks from today here in the United States. So today's topic is going to be Saturday morning memories, but mostly about cereals of the 70s and 80s. Because again, if you're my age, you grew up in the 70s, mostly the 80s. I was born in 73, the very end. And so cereals were, I don't know, maybe again, this is just my perspective on things. This is Mike in the Midwest. Cereals were a big deal in the 80s. I don't know if they're such a big deal right now, because I don't go to the grocery store too much. It's mostly my wife and daughters. They tend to go. I just put in my requests, and I'm very much a creature of habit. I ate the same thing for lunch every day. I go to the same places for dinner, have the same things at dinner each night of the week. Breakfast is always the same. So I don't have a lot of variety in life. When you're a kid, I think a variety is a big factor. But before we jump into the cereals of the 80s to kind of talk about some of my memories with that, let's just briefly touch on the Saturday morning routine when you're a kid in, say, pre-elementary age up through like mid-elementary. So maybe from the time you're like 4 or 5 till the time maybe you're like 10 to 12. So as I recall, now again, remember, as I recall, we did not have cable TV until I was probably about 8. So we just had the network channels. We had a couple of TVs in the house, and we had a black and white TV, and we also had one color TV. And I do remember that, the biggest deal, I had my buddy Ryan across the street, my best friend. We did everything together. The thing was, we hung out, obviously, all the time after school, all the weekends, stuff like that. But on Saturday mornings, you would kind of get up on your own, right? I wouldn't go over to Ryan's house right away. You would kind of, a lot of times, get up maybe before your parents, or your parents kind of, they didn't get you out of bed. So you were kind of on your own, but you would get up. And of course, what's the most important thing at that time on a Saturday morning? It's the cartoons, right? So you would get up and you would watch your cartoons. But as I look back on that time, there were a few things that really kind of stuck with me now, say 40 years later, 35 to 40 years later. One is, there were times as a kid where you might oversleep and miss your favorite cartoon. So maybe your favorite cartoon was on at 8 or 8:30. And maybe, because I didn't have an alarm clock when I was 6, I just kind of went to bed and got up when you got up. But the thing is, if you happen to oversleep, the kids don't understand this today because everything is on demand. You just missed that week's cartoon. And it was usually only half an hour, maybe 15-minute cartoon. So you had to wait till the next Saturday. So it was kind of tragic. I worried about that stuff. One of my favorite cartoons was Pac-Man. There was like a Pac-Man cartoon. I think it ran for 2 seasons. And for some reason, I love that cartoon. And so it was on earlier rather than later. So I know there were a couple Saturdays that I missed it, and I was just like devastated. And kind of piggybacking on that, we're going to do a show on holiday specials that are traditional, kind of like the Halloween special for Charlie Brown, which was on Apple TV Plus, which I wasn't a fan of. But if you missed, say, Frosty the Snowman, or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, or Santa Claus is Coming to Town, or what have you, if you missed that back in the day on network TV, you were just out of luck. I mean, you didn't have to wait till the next Saturday. You had to wait till the next Christmas. It was brutal. So you were very careful. And that's what I think people now call appointment television. You made sure that you were there to see your special show, your special holiday special, what have you. And things have sure changed. All right. So before we dive into that, one of the things that we had here in St. Louis that I know is probably different than most places around the country. Maybe it wasn't, but I tend to think this was something that wasn't widespread around the country, and it was called Saturday school. Now, when I was in high school, Saturday school had a totally different definition. Saturday school, when a teacher gave you Saturday school in high school, that just meant you got Saturday detention. You sat up at Hazelwood Central from 8 a.m. till noon with nothing to do, kind of like Breakfast Club. And but it wasn't as exciting as Breakfast Club. Nobody, got high. Nobody danced, all together and made cool dances, cried your eyes out about life and stuff like that. That was just Saturday detention. They just bored you out of your mind for 4 hours on a Saturday morning. Now, when I was a kid, again, pre-elementary to early elementary school, our local elementary school, Duchesne Elementary, which was 2 blocks from my house, they had Saturday school. And what it was, I think it was a kind of a one of those programs to get kids ready for kindergarten. And so you would go up on a Saturday. It's probably like a Parents as Teachers, because I know Parents as Teachers was really big in our district. It was one of the first places to have it. And so we would go up there on Saturday mornings, and you would do, I don't know, it's kind of like camp projects, like pre-reading. The teachers would read stories. You would do hands-on projects for like fine motor skills, stuff like that. But I just remember, they always had stuff around the holidays. I mean, again, this was the early 80s. So I do remember that we would make Saturday school. I have this memory. We took those brown paper grocery bags, right? The big ones that we used to have a long time ago to put your groceries in. And so every kid would get one, and we would turn them upside down. You would cut a head hole out of the bottom of the grocery bag, the paper bag, and you would cut 2 armholes out of the sides, and it became like a shirt, kind of like a covering for your shirt. And you would decorate that, and we dressed up like Native Americans. You had some of us were Pilgrims, some of us were Native Americans. We had the band around our head with feathers made out of construction paper. Some people had those, I don't know, the hats that the Pilgrims wore, and you had like a white collar. Again, stereotypical, but that's just how things were in the 80s. It wasn't meant to be mean or rude or anything like that. It's just kind of how we grew up, and we have cute pictures from that. But I do remember, because what it did was, as a kid, it really got you kind of excited about the holiday. It gave you something tangible to make, something tangible to connect what the holiday was about. And of course, there's a lot of debate about that. But I mean, we got to have that experience with our friends up at the elementary school before we were elementary age. So what it did was it got us ready to go to school. We got to see the kindergarten classroom. We got to work with glue sticks and scissors and meet teachers and stuff like that. I don't know if they do this anymore, but I do remember it was pretty exciting. I'm kind of a nerd. You guys know that. So, and I became a teacher later in life for 17 years. So I kind of liked it. But again, it wasn't super long. It was a couple hours on a Saturday morning. Then I was good to go because I wanted to ride my bike. I wanted to play the Atari and hang out with my buddies. So that was just one of the things. I don't know. So let me know. Did you guys have Saturday school? So that was a big deal on Saturday mornings. Also the cartoons. Also on Saturday mornings was always, now this was after Ryan and I, watched our cartoons alone. And then we would meet up like at 10 o'clock, 10:30 when the cartoons started going off. We'd play video games, Atari 2600. I had one. He had one. We had probably half similar games and half different games. So I'll go over to his house. I remember we played at his house nonstop the Atari 2600 Empire Strikes Back game where you're battling the AT-ATs. We played that thing forever. And I also remember that we played Pac-Man at both of our houses. Now, if you know the history of Pac-Man on the Atari 2600, a lot of people say it was one of the worst games ever, along with ET, and it was pretty bad. It ended up being a pack-in game for the system, but we bought it because we already had it. We got Combat as our pack-in. That's how old ours were. But to this day, I can hear the sound of that Pac-Man because it had such a different sound than the video game. It was like bonk, 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 bonk. As you went around, and you need to look up the sounds of the Atari 2600 Pac-Man. It was very distinctive. And I remember we played that so much at his house that I can remember every Saturday morning, it seemed like when we were playing that game, his mom and Ryan had like 4 dogs at his house. He had like big poodles. His mom loved animals. They had birds, they had turtles. It was like a zoo at his house. So every Saturday morning, I remember his mom vacuuming the carpet in the living room where the Atari was, where we were playing the Atari. And she would sprinkle this stuff on the carpet before she, I guess like freshener, before she would vacuum. And to this day, and I am not kidding, this has been almost 40 years. When I hear that sound, I can smell the combination of the vacuum cleaner running and that stuff she would sprinkle on the carpets. And also, this is so bizarre, I still remember Hall & Oates. She would always have Hall & Oates playing Maneater, Your Kiss Is on My List. It was always Hall & Oates. And to this day, I love Hall & Oates, one of my favorite groups. So it's so funny how, again, I want this show to be about reliving positive memories. And when I think of the Pac-Man game, I mean, I am right back there in Ryan's living room with Hall & Oates playing, his mom vacuuming, that smells, the sounds, everything was there. The feel of that rubbery Atari 2600 joystick with the orange button you would be pushing. Those were just some of the best times. And the thing is, and I know there's nothing you could do about this, but I mean, when you were that age, think about that. You had no responsibilities. The only thing we had to do on a Saturday was have fun, right? I mean, the only thing you had to worry about was, okay, what are we going to do next? Because in the afternoons, a lot of times we went to the skating rink because they had a matinee from 2 to 4. So we'd get up, we'd watch our cartoons, we'd play Atari. Of course, if it was nice outside, or even if it wasn't nice outside, Ryan and I hopped on our bikes. I have my Huffy bike. We'll talk about that sometime. And we went everywhere on our bikes around town. We rode our bikes all over. We just rode our bikes into the ground. But the biggest thing I want to jump into before I get going too long are those 80s breakfast cereals, right? Because one of the things that everybody has kind of a different take on how your family tackle breakfast. My family, we didn't make big breakfasts. Like my mom wasn't a big cook. Now I do remember, here's one thing I do remember when I went to elementary school at the Christian school from 2nd to 6th grade, a lot of times my mom bought these, and this was on school days. This isn't Saturday mornings. This is a tangent, of course. But my mom bought these, they were biscuit and gravy, Bob Evans, like little boxes. And so you would pop, we had a microwave early. That's one of the things we actually did have early. This big, huge microwave. It was enormous. So you would pop this little pouch in the microwave and it would, I guess, soften the biscuit and make the gravy, warmed up the gravy. They were in 2 different containers and then you mix them up and stir them up. And that's what I had for breakfast a lot before school, growing up at elementary school. But on Saturday mornings, like you always just got up on your own. You would grab a bowl, you would grab your cereal, and then you would, just watch the cartoons while you had a bowl of cereal. You didn't bug your parents, right? My dad played in a band every Friday and Saturday night. So he got home about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So you definitely didn't want to bother him. My mom would stay sleeping in. So, you were on your own for breakfast on Saturday morning. So it was typically cereal. Now, the cereals of the 80s and 70s were all over the place. And the one thing I remember about cereals is, and we'll talk. So next week's topic is going to be grocery stores and how they were different, or maybe the same, but maybe different in the 80s compared to today, but also maybe how they're different in St. Louis from how they are wherever they are on the East Coast, West Coast, wherever we are in the world. But the thing about cereals, there are a couple things. I mean, Saturday morning cartoons were only there, in my opinion, back in the day, to entice kids like me to buy that next box of cereal. I mean, they had to have every cereal had to have a mascot that was cooler than the next mascot, right? Whether it was own or the burglar guy for the Cookie Crisp, or Captain Crunch. What Everybody had a mascot, and they had to kind of outdo each other, because not only were you watching cartoons on a Saturday morning, you were watching mini cartoons for every cereal commercial. You had the Smurfs, you had ET, you had Donkey Kong. I mean, everybody had a cereal. Batman, the Trix Rabbit, the B for Cheerios. I mean, the thing was, cereal in marketing back in the 80s was probably one of the greatest things to look back on, right? The Cuckoo Bird for Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I mean, it was amazing. And so I remember distinctly, and I'll get into this again next week when we talk about grocery stores, but if there was a toy aisle in a grocery store equivalent, it was the cereal aisle. And again, maybe I'm exaggerating. I don't go to the grocery store a whole lot right now, but as I recall, in the 80s, when I would go to the grocery store with my mom, the cereal aisle was, no kidding, it seemed to me like a full aisle, both sides, just cereal boxes everywhere. Now, what was the one important thing to pick out your cereal for that couple of weeks or that week? It wasn't what you wanted to eat, right? If you remember, now maybe it's just me, it was what was the prize inside the box. A lot of times it would have cool little trinkets or prizes or, pack-ins, whatever you want to call them, that would entice you to get the cereal, even if that cereal was like 17th on your list as far as taste. You would get it. You would get home. You would open the bag. You'd stick your hand down there. You would, probably grinding up all the grains and so forth. But you would grab that glow-in-the-dark sticker or what have you, and you would be so pumped for that. But let's talk about some of the cereals I remember as a kid that we had at the house, and some that I always wanted. Okay, so one of the cereals that we always had was Fruit Loops. Now that's a pretty simple one. Now this is another one you can still get today, right? Fruit Loops, Toucan Sam. I must have had something for toucans like the bird, but they were always good. They were a sweet cereal. They were like Cheerios, but they were a candied type of Cheerios, right? Another cereal that we had a lot was Cocoa Puffs. Now, my wife's probably listening in the background because she's on her break from teaching. Cocoa Puffs is something I had as a kid, but also I eat Cocoa Puffs a lot still today. Now, one of the things I do every night, and this is not a good thing to do, this is a terrible thing to do, but every night before bed, this is why I run 13 miles every morning, probably. Every night before bed, I will have a bowl of cereal, and it's almost always Cocoa Puffs. Cocoa Puffs are my jam. That's what I'm into right now, except for the last couple of weeks. What instigated this show happening was about 3 weeks ago, I was going in to get my Cocoa Puffs before bed, and there's this box of cereal that had been sitting there, and nobody was eating it. And I hate to waste food, right? I just hate to buy. I've turned into my parents. So I hate to waste food. And there's this box of cereal. It's Life, but it's Cinnamon Life. So Life is kind of like a wheat cereal. And all I remember is, back in the day, their commercials didn't have a fancy mascot. It just had a kid named Mikey. And their commercials, I believe, for Life cereal were Mikey likes it, right? Nobody wanted to eat it, but Mikey ate it. So it was cool. Then everybody else would eat it. It wasn't that. It was the fact that I just didn't want to waste the cereal. So I grabbed it and I'm like, okay, I'll try it. It's probably not good. I'll just give it a shot because it's just going to waste. Oh, that stuff was awesome. Awesome. So Cinnamon Life was giving me life over the past couple of weeks. It's like, I just can't stop eating it. So I've switched out to that over the past couple of weeks, but that's one that again was around in the 80s. Now, those were pretty simple, those were my staple cereals, but there were tons that I wanted to get because it was all about marketing. And my mom pretty much stuck to those things. She would get us, we always had not Frosted Flakes, we had Frosted Rice Krispies, not just the Rice Krispie plain, in the blue box. It was like a white box. It was Rice Krispie cereal, but it had a lot of sugar on it, right? Like frosted Rice Krispies. Now, nowadays you can get those, but they're like in chunks but I haven't seen them since those days. They were just frosted. They were just the regular ones frosted. Now, some of the cereals that were around that I always wanted to get, but I guess I just never got around to getting them. Couple of cereals, Pac-Man's. Everything that was popular had a cereal in the 80s. You had Pac-Man cereal. You had C-3POs. Now, I never had either one of those. You had E.T. cereal, Donkey Kong Jr., Ghostbusters cereal. Mr. T had a cereal. I mean, he's on the box with his chains. Big old bowl of cereal right there. You had Dunkin' Donuts cereal. You had something called, now this one I never had, but I listen to a lot of retro podcasts and I hear about this one all the time. So let me know if you had this one. It was called Waffle-O's. I don't think they make this anymore, but if they did, I would be all over it. It's little waffles with maple syrup on top is a cereal. Waffle-O's. Dude, sign me up for some Waffle-O's. I would totally go for that. There was a Batman cereal, which I didn't have. There was a Barbie cereal, a G.I. Joe's. If you had any of these, let me know. There's even a Bill and Ted's cereal from the 80s. So good. Now, of course, we had the Sugar Smacks. Yes, Sugar Smacks were good. One of the other things, just all you gotta do is Google this. They're all over the place. You had your healthy cereals too, like Wheaties. One of the cereal, I never got Wheaties because I like the athletes on the box, but it wasn't sweet enough, right? But there was a cereal that was similar, and it was called Kix, Kix. We did get Kix, and I like that one okay, but it wasn't as sweet as like the Cocoa Puffs or the Fruit Loops or anything like that. The Frosted Rice Krispies. So I don't know so one of the things I always really wanted to get, which my mom never allowed us to get, and I've bought since I'm an adult, right? I think the best thing about being an adult with a job is that you can now get the stuff that your parents wouldn't let you get as a kid. One of the things they always had on the shelf, my mom would never let us get this, and I understand why. It was the variety pack of the little boxes, right? There were little boxes that were like single servings. The pack would have, I can't remember, like 8 or 10, little mini boxes of cereal. You might have a box of Fruit Loops, a box of Apple Jacks, a box of Cocoa Puffs, but then they always threw in like some stinky cereals. Like 2 or 3 of the boxes were things I would never eat. So that's why my mom wouldn't get these mini boxes, but there was just something about like, I wanted that variety pack. I wanted the little single serving boxes, but they were probably twice as expensive and just not as good of a value. So when I look back on cereals and just Google it, go to Google, type in, cereals from the 1980s. I think one of the things that'll just give you strong nostalgia is looking at the boxes, because these are the boxes that sat in our cabinets or in our pantries when we were growing up in those formative years. And of course you had the Munster cereals, Frankenberry, Boo-Berry, what was the chocolate one? Count Chocula. The thing was, excuse me, cereals weren't just what you had for breakfast. They were a part of our daily life as a kid, right? I mean, because maybe I'm going too far in this, but I mean, we would talk about the cereals we had at home at school. And, I remember Cracker Jack cereal. We did have that. I'm not a big fan of Cracker Jack cereal, but you got a big prize in the box. So cereals, I think, is for people of my generation, for folks that are maybe in your 30s and 40s right now, cereals were not just what you had for breakfast. They were marketed heavy to us. They had little prizes that we wanted, but also, you got behind the mascot for the cereal. Were you a Toucan Sam fan? Did you like Mikey from Life? Did you like the Fruity Pebbles from Fred Flintstone? Were you a Tony the Tiger, Frosted Flakes kid? Were you a Toucan Sam or a Cuckoo Bird for Cocoa Puffs? I still am, because I eat them all the time. But you would get behind that. And I think that was a special time. with how healthy things have to be for kids nowadays, I'm not sure, but I don't think cereals anymore have the prizes inside. I don't know if they've written laws against that, if it's against, eh, if it's like immoral or unethical to entice kids to eat sugary cereals by putting a pencil in the box. I don't know. I don't know. But I mean, I'm going to go to my grocery store this week and go down the cereal aisle and just check it out, because I know that around the holidays, you can still get the Monster cereals. You can still obviously get Cocoa Puffs, and you can get Fruit Loops. You can get Frosted Flakes. So those cereals are there, but the real specific, like timely ones like Pac-Man, E.T., Ghostbusters, Mr. T, Batman, Donkey Kong, those are all long gone, but there's still a nostalgia there for those. So I want to hear, what were your favorite breakfast cereals and why? And what are your Saturday morning memories? Please share those over on Patreon in one of the two threads, either the audio thread or the video thread. And I'll share those here next week. And next week on the podcast, we're going to dive into what grocery stores looked like here in the Midwest in the 1980s. We'll talk about that. I have some memories to share. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Again, thank you so much for being a patron of the show. I can't thank you enough for that. Please do go on to patreon.com/BeOurGuestPodcast. Share your memories. What were your favorite 80s, 70s, 90s breakfast cereals? So right now, I think I'm going to head upstairs and have some cereal for lunch. It sounds really good. So until we talk again next Thursday, everybody out there, please do stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you real soon. Thanks, everybody on Facebook. Go get some cereal. Crunch, crunch. Talk to you later.